Beyond the Bus: Violence and the Disruption in the Struggle Against Gentrification in the Bay Area. As this book was being finished, a series of blockades against shuttle buses carrying tech workers to companies like Google took place in the Bay Area of California before spreading to Seattle. On January 1st, 2014, anarchists also marched to the Mission District in San Francisco against the continued police brutality, a campaign by business owners to push out homeless and new condo developments. This essay connects the dots between the struggles of past and the battles of today, while also placing the corporate media's usual crying over windows in context.
You leave San Francisco like, bye, thanks for coming to San Francisco. Come back in April, we're having a sale on Birkenstocks. As soon as you get to the other side, welcome to Oakland, bitch!
Dave Chappelle. Sabotage and militancy within the fight against gentrification, like all struggles in the Bay Area, California, is nothing new. However, in the wake of recent protests against tech companies in which buses carrying workers were blocked and in Oakland a bus window was broken out, many mainstream media sources have glossed over this history. San Francisco is seen as peaceful and organized, while Oakland is violent and chaotic. While most commentators probably did not have Dave Chappelle in mind when they made such comparisons, the racial and class undertones that can be gleaned from such an analysis is illuminating. The state, with the media in tow, will always attempt to divide those on the front lines in making one group look more law-abiding than the other. This is a tactic that is designed to destabilize insurgency and crack a movement in half against itself. In many ways, the Google bus protests serve to bring issues of gentrification and evictions to a mass audience by exposing a deep tension within a class-divided city, just as the Earth Liberation Front arsons did to the topics of gas-guzzling SUVs and urban sprawl in the late 90s. Beginning an audience also means whoever is poised to speak loudest often reaps the reward after the disruption has faded and people are looking for answers. If those that seek a world outside class society are not ready to push for militant, collective, and combative action beyond simply symbolic blockades, then more often than not, politicians will simply outmaneuver us in our wake with promises of changes in legislation once swept into office. Some writers, such as Kevin Montgomery on the blog Uptown Almanac, instead point to how protests are in fact winning. The victories stemming from this triumph include tech companies donating laptops to schools and other acts of philanthropy, to Mayor Ed Lee of San Francisco coming out in favor of higher minimum wage, and the SF School Board of Supervisors passing various measures aimed at half-heartedly protecting tenants while the Ellis Act stays in place. As Sue Cagle wrote in Wired, when tech does give back, it does so in its own and arguably self-serving image. Google gives Wi-Fi for the city's public parks, Facebook gives laptops to public schools, unquote. For liberals, these actions are a success, because they've garnished simply the attention of politicians who can then, in theory, enact laws which will address demands of the population. In reality, politicians have always acquiesced to protest movements and working-class disruptions as a means of clearing the streets for fear of wider revolt. As we saw after several rounds of Google bus protests, the San Francisco Transit Authority moved to change a considerably small amount of money tech companies that use muni stops with their buses and get permits, thus making legal what was illegal before. Government appears responsive, tech companies keep doing what they're doing, and elites everywhere hope that this small reform will return business to normal. In the end, the real cause of anger in the Bay over gentrification, evictions, and higher cost of living goes unanswered. And while recent legislation against condo conversations might help residents stay in their homes, ultimately even the cost of living itself, lack of access to jobs, education, and transit will also continue to push many residents out. New laws themselves are also never a safeguard against evictions, with many landlords often turning to harassment, threats, or even arson to evict tenants. Landlords and speculators also have a powerful tool on their side: the police. Starting in the summer of 2013, the Mission District of San Francisco between 16th and 17th Streets, formerly thought to be an ungentrifiable area, recently saw a campaign created by local business owners to clean up the plaza. This push by local business owners saw a buildup of police presence at the 16th Street BART Plaza, entrance to the subway terminal. At the same time, it was announced that a new condo project will be placed where Walgreens now stands across the street. This, of course, is no coincidence. In January 2014, anarchists organized a march from 24th BART Station to the 16th Plaza, bringing attention to connections between the rise of police brutality in the Mission District and the recent campaign by business owners to remove street people for the oncoming new residents. For the renters and businesses that may be possibly evicted in the wake of development, the current ballot initiatives will do little. Local politicians and the mayor have pushed for a building of more affordable housing within current developments, while thousands of seniors, AIDS patients, and poor working people have already or currently are being thrown out. Only direct action gets the goods. The pressure and the disruption must be kept on. When confronted with the force of the market, we must answer with a force of our own. Now is the time to literally demand the impossible and act on those desires. Mass rent strikes, large open assemblies of people in their neighborhoods, occupations of vacant buildings for all, preventing each and every eviction with organized force. Many like Sujin Kajal have pointed out that while Google and tech companies are only a piece of the puzzle, the real perpetrators are developers, speculators, serial evictors, and those within the government giving tax breaks to corporations. These people are of course right. However, historically, working and poor people are not able to effect change through democratic means upon political and economic elites. The courts, the media, the police, they all work against us. Regular people have power when they come together as a group and deny a basic service or function. This can be denying their labor or simply their civility. They can engage in disruption. Simply put, it is easy to block a bus. Like Occupy, the blockades of Google buses are a social action that people can do en masse. This is why they caught the imaginations of so many, and this is why they have spread. This is also why these actions are powerful, not because they have gotten the ears of the elites, but because they are scared of them. Having a sense of the historical struggle against displacement can also help shine a light on the path ahead of us. For those that are interested in looking into records of resistance to evictions and displacement in the Bay Area, would do well to read a document floating around online prepared by the now defunct Mission Anti-Displacement Coalition. The text written by Fernando Martí states, the first recorded eviction in what is now called the Mission District occurred in 1776. The Spanish arrival forced the Ohlone, who had lived in the region for at least 5,000 years, to flee across the bay, unquote. Soon after, the Ohlone people were forced into slave labor at the Mission District Dolores, which now sits next to the famous Dolores Park. While native people launched uprisings against the mission system by the 1800s, the Ohlone population was decimated. In the post-gold rush period, the mission became a working-class haven as the rich opted to live in homes overlooking the bay and the ocean. As American capitalism became more industrialized, the mission grew as a center for working-class militancy, with the Red Stone Building being a major node for operations during the 1934 San Francisco General Strike. Through the 1970s to 90s, as production was moved overseas, the mission became home to many niche-based industries, with, quote, the city-wide proportions of those working in manufacturing remained constant at 9% of total jobs, unquote. While the production shifted, the spirit of proletarian action was not lost, as strikes and organizations continued in a variety of sectors. The first wave of Latinos began arriving in the mission during World War II, some coming into the U.S. through the Bracero program or by fleeing U.S.-funded civil wars in their countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. In the 1960s and 70s, the mission grew as a hotbed for militant organizing inspired by the frame worker struggle in the Central Valley and the battles against imperialism in Latin America. This took the form of militant occupations of SF State, in part to ethnic studies, the indigenous takeover of Alcatraz Island, and the creation of certain groups such as El Comité para Liberar a los Siete de la Raza, modeled after the Black Panthers in Oakland, which organized free programs in the community. When 7 young people living in the mission were accused of killing a police officer, a community struggle was formed around them, Los Siete de la Raza becoming a milestone in the neighborhood. Going into the 80s, the mission was a stronghold of solidarity with revolutionary struggles in Central America, with residents even trained to go off and join insurgent forces. It was within the context that the battle against gentrification began. Quote, through the 70s, battles raged against gentrifiers, with gangs chasing Anglos out of local taquerias, and activists stopping a bar that they thought would have attracted upper-income crowd from being opened on 24th Street. But for many, it was the parades of lowriders that scared the whites from moving any further east, and made the Mission Street the line that stopped gentrification in the 70s. Eventually, Anglo homeowners, the Mission Merchants Association, and the police harassment forced lowriders to leave. Bank policies of redlining, marking out neighborhoods they would not lend to, kept Latinos and other people of color from building up wealth or being able to keep their homes in good condition. Capital's flight to suburbs throughout the 50s and 60s created areas of poverty that would even become ripe for new investment and new cycles of growth. In the mission, this was felt as a loss of access to jobs and education, and the resulting jobless youth in the streets, termed by the police gangs. Starting in the 70s, mission residents, especially youth and families, were affected by increase in gang violence, drug use, and waves of police brutality that targeted youth, immigrants, and other people of color. Redeveloping was the most visible tool of capital's assault on the working class. In this process, cities would declare certain areas blighted, and would target them for destruction, buying up properties by eminent domain and redeveloping them into neighborhoods. In San Francisco, this meant targeting working-class strongholds, the South Market bastion of unionized longshoremen, the veterans of the 34th Strike, as well as elderly Filipinos, the black neighborhood of the Fillmore, and the Latino neighborhood of the Mission." Unquote. With the coming of the bar to the mission, many groups, from the Brown Berets to homeowners, banded together to stop the displacement of working-class families and ended up stopping much of the new construction. Through the 1970s, organizations against displacement continued, especially in the face of a rash of hotel fires, such as the fire at the Garland Hotel, which led to the creation of the Garland Pit, an open-air art space that was also a center for organizing. But the 1990s cycles of divestment and reinvestment led to a wave of evictions of unprecedented proportions as the Bay Area experienced the dot-com boom. At the same time, California was in the midst of anti-immigrant xenophobic backlash, as politicians attempted to pass Proposition 187, which would deny benefits to immigrants and their families. The mission remained a hotbed of both organizing and action, both against gentrification and anti-immigrant backlash. This was expressed in a variety of ways, from posters calling on attacks on yuppie businesses and cars, to public marches, mass assemblies, and disruption of government meetings and occupation of buildings, and even the attempted arson of condos. The current period of struggle, marked by the linking in public consciousness between evictions and the tech industry, has also used a variety of means, from graffiti, public marches and rallies, block parties that attacked Google bus piñatas, public occupations, and blockades against homes threatened with eviction, picketing of businesses responsible, to militant marches down Valencia Street that destroyed and vandalized a variety of businesses. Such battles cannot also be removed from the ongoing struggles against police brutality and fights over land and green space that have also been raging in the city. Over the past several years, the mission has exploded in anger as police have killed and shot young people and a homeless man in both Hunters Point at the BART station and in the mission. Young men of color such as DeParis Williams and Kevin Clark have also been savagely beaten around the 24th BART station by SFPD, leading to large protests. Young people, many of them coming out to occupy SF, have also fought to save urban gardens and farms from eviction to be turned into condos. The several-week-long occupation of Gezi Gardens, formerly Hayes Valley Farm, featured the longest urban tree set in the U.S. and was carried out in solidarity with the ongoing anti-gentrification battle raging in Turkey. Participants in each cycle of struggle often forget or are unaware of those that came before them. Militants in the 1960s perhaps were unaware of the anarchists, socialists, communists, and unionists that did battle in the same neighborhood several decades before them. Just as many who call themselves revolutionaries now are unaware of those that preceded them. What is clear is the struggle against displacement is a class struggle, or one in which one's class does battle with another over basic interests, conditions, and control over their lives. On one side, the developers, politicians, and city planners who have a stake in making millions, and on the other, the working, homeless, and poor people who want to live without being displaced. The popular struggles against BART construction show that even in the face of what the rich call progress, everyday people can still come together and win. This fight has always used a variety of tactics, most of them aimed at being disruptive and stopping business as usual. Often these tactics are confrontational and sometimes violent. Sometimes they are done individually, such as graffiti, posters, or even arson, and sometimes these are collective acts, such as occupations, blockades, riots, strikes, marches, and pickets. The rock that crashed through the Google bus window during the end of 2013 is nothing new. It is simply another example of antagonisms that have existed as long as capitalism, and the state that protects it. New and better targets will be found, but the important thing is that we have begun to act with each other and have called on others to join us.
Next thing you know, you're waiting on the light change and realize that they're building condominiums and bike lanes. Voila, all of a sudden the surface is futile. Let's save the inner city, baby, it's urban renewal.